Welcome to our second webinar for today. Going to be going over House of Worship, kind of running of Vista. To start off, we don't have anything shared at the moment, but to start off, Jack is going to go over a little bit about the media server integration because he has a media server on his machine, and that's not something I have. So we were going to start with that, do a couple minutes of that, and then after he's done there, I'll take over and we'll go into more of the key lists with ProPresenter and or Reaper, things like that. So anyway, with that, I'll hand it over to Jack.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Just show you my screen here. Okay, so you guys should have seen this thing before. Just zoom this in a little bit. Okay, so this is my media server screen here in WYSIWYG. I'm using Green Hippo today, but if you're working with media servers, everything that I can show you in the operation and the setup is exactly the same. So we can take a look at this. Let's just get rid of these Q lists here. I'll show you how it works in the control first, and then I'll step back and show you how we can work with this. So with the layers, we can see the content in the Gobo section. We can flick through and choose the layers. We have a input folder and an output folder, so we can just flick through these and we can see the visual thumbnails of the content that we have selected. For instance, I can choose some of my background sources here. Let's just go up and choose a Vista logo. So the generic controls of the media server that we have is over color, position, zoom, and of course intensity as well. The cool thing about using Vista to control media servers is that you can copy and paste between different layers. Now, a lot of the media server controls are custom, so you may see them as additional tabs, for example, Keystone. And if I drag down to the bottom, we can see mixer mode that I need to show you to demonstrate the next little bit. To change the kind of ranges of DMX in here, the best way that you can do this is to actually click into the header, and this pops up the custom DMX browser, and then we can just pick a certain control that we need to do on our server, for example, lighten. So I should now be able to see these three interacting with each other. Again, because we're using a generic model, we can come down to something like effects templates, and let's just do a circle effect on these. And we'll make them yellow, this one magenta, and this one cyan. Let's just zoom out a little bit to show you the rest of my rig here. So we can take what we've made on these media layers, we can still do copying, and if I then come back to some moving fixtures, we can paste, and we take what we've done from media server to fixtures. So of course, if we're working live, we can accurately control everything together. So that's a very quick intro to media server control. We just treat it exactly the same as anything else, just like a moving light, pretty much. In terms of patching these, we still patch them like any other fixture. So for example, if I search for my media server layer, you just patch them depending on how many layers you actually want to control. Often you might find other elements that's available from the media server, but in my example, I'm just controlling the layer themselves. When we patch these, you won't see any thumbnails. That's an additional step that we have to do. To do that, we press patch and import media server thumbnails, and a little window pops up. And usually, if you have a real server connected, this will pop up a little row here saying the server name and its IP address, and we just click that and then press import media server thumbnails. Once that's downloaded, These thumbnails live locally on your Vista machine or console in your Vista data folder. And to assign them to a layer, we assign them to this fixture here, not any of these. It's done at the sort of upper level. We right click and press use custom media, and then you'll see a folder for each server. These would be the server names normally. So if I want to use this, I just click this, and when we actually select it, I won't do it in this demonstration, we would then see the actual servers coming on, and we then see the visual content in here. So that's a very brief introduction into media servers. I did do a slightly longer demonstration in this morning's webinar, so that's on YouTube already if you want to check it out. Are there any questions on that, Ben?
Nope, no questions on that.
Well, in which case, I'm going to give control back to you.
All right. All right. Oops. Give me a second here. I'm gonna reset my monitors because I had to move stuff around for you. All right. So can you see my screen now? We good with this one? We should see over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through just some simple programming with using QLists and transition between QLists. I've also have ProPresenter running on my machine here too. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of matching stuff that's in the ProPresenter actual demo file. So if you ever want to get in and kind of play with this, what I'm doing here is exactly the same as what's in the sample content that you get from ProPresenter. So first thing what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've created some QLists in Vista. And these QLists are along the bottom here. I've added them to my show, programmed some stuff. I programmed a walk-in QList, and then a couple song QLists here. Again, these are the same ones that are in the ProPresenter slides. A speaker QList, and then another song QList. I think there's a couple others in the ProPresenter. I just didn't bother programming the rest of them. And we'll open up one of these things and take a look at what one of them looks like. So to start, we have a walk-in QList. So when I play through this QList, it starts out with a walk-in look, and then I did something for a countdown. So again, countdown before the show starts, and then finally going back to a blue look, which would be the transition look between this QList and the next one. In this QList, I've not done anything special. So if I look at all my Qs, I don't have any commands in here. This is designed to be a manually run QList. It's also not MIDI. And if you see these icons down at the bottom, this little green icon here in the QList on the playbacks shows that this is being controlled via MIDI notes. This one is not. So this is designed to be a manually run QList to start the program. And if I close that back out, we'll go back in here to the console. So we're running through that one, and for now I'm going to release that. So next QList is my first song QList. So in this case, I went ahead and I built this QList. Again, I use that same blue look coming from the other QList into this one. And then I go in and I've just created a couple simple cues: verse, chorus, verse, and bridge. So nothing crazy. Pay no attention to the programming. I just roughed in random things, so it may or may not look right. It's just an example here. So, and in this QList, I've got a couple things going on. So the first thing I have going on is in my QList properties. Under MIDI, I've set a MIDI note to play this QList. So whenever I hit the play button, or the MIDI note, it's going to basically push the play button on this cue. It's the only one I've done. I haven't done anything else, other operations on here. If you wanted to, you could add a release MIDI note, but I took it up a notch. Instead of doing it in a MIDI function, I've added some other commands into my QList. If I open up this QList and look at the timeline, I've added a command to the first cue of this QList, and it's called release all except. So what will happen right now is this QList is currently playing, and I can see it's playing down here as well. when I play this first cue of this cue list, it's going to hit that command and it's going to release that cue list for me automatically. So now I'm back to having a single cue list running. I'm in my blue look. Now, something I did a little differently than what we've gone through in past webinars is adding the same look or the same transition cue from the beginning to the end. In this case, I just added the transition look to the beginning of this cue list. That way I could just fire it from here, and it's just going to go right from this cue right into that cue. Comes down to your personal preference on programming. You can do it that way, or you can add those extra cues in there. Couple different options. What I've also done in this one though too is I've added some move in black cues. That way my fixtures start in the color they start, and rather than being in white first, they start in that color. I have a verse, I have a chorus, another verse. This verse marks the next cue for some more stuff in the next verse, which is position and color on those. A tag, a bridge, and an end. So the end is a very slow fade out, and it's going back into that same blue for the most part. It's just a longer fade out, so it's not exactly the same as the first one. We'll close both those. So again, I have those two cue lists that will play from one to the other, and then I have my speaker cue list. And if I go in here and open up that one, in my speaker cue list, I have two cues. It's basically a move in black just to get everybody in position. And automatically it goes right into my speaker look. So in my speaker look, I have a single light up on the center, and I have some stuff in the background. And as I look at this, maybe I decide, yeah, you know what, that stuff in the background might be a little bit too much. So let me just back that down a little bit. And maybe I don't need to, I don't really want them tight. So I'll zoom them out. So as I'm doing this, because I've created a mark cue for this, a move in black cue for this already for these fixtures, those changes should automatically translate into the stuff that I've done on those fixtures. So it's all good to go. And in this cue list, I have to remember what I did with this one. I did add a command. So I added a command, a release all except command. And again, I did it at the end of the queue. That way it would play all this first. It would mark my fixtures, and then it would release the previous cues. That way I'm not left with a dip or dark in the queue or on the stage at all. However, with that being said, you can actually do this and make it go dark. If I wanted to put this release command earlier in the queue and actually push things so that the lights don't come on till later, I could basically create a blackout without creating a blackout. It's going to be releasing everything before the next lights come up. So again, you can get a little creative with how you're doing things here. And I have my speaker cue, obviously, and then that goes up. And I'm going to discard those changes because I decided I'll just leave it as is. And then finally, I have another cue list here, which is going to be my next song afterwards. I'll open that real quick. And we'll take a look at what we've got in here. So again, I have a release all except. It's at the end of the queue. This way, these lights will come on first before it releases the speaker cue list. And you can see there's where stuff started happening, and the speaker cue list released after we had stuff going on. Let's see what I did here. I'm not quite. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably spend more time actually tweaking this to make it transition the way I'd like to see it. It might not work exactly the way I would liked, but again, it was quick, down and dirty. Something else I did in this cue list is I created some alias cues in this. So what I did with this is I took a single cue and I used it over and over again. Now later on in this cue list, I named it verse 3, and that renamed all the previous ones. So I would probably want to just name this verse if I was going to do that rather than give it a number. And now I have it. And the chorus I've also aliased between the choruses. That way, when I do this, I only have to change one of these, and it's going to be the same cue on all of them. So the only issue with that is if I get to a point where I don't want that alias to continue on, I'd have to break this alias. So let's say chorus 3 here. Let me get a link. Chorus 3, I want it to be a bigger chorus. So it's doing something there. So in this case, because it's aliased, I need to first break the alias. So if I right click on there and say remove Q alias, it will break that alias. It left these two still together. And then in this Q list, I could decide that, you know what, I'm going to do a circle small on the, oops, I should probably select them first before doing that. That'd be these, and we'll do a circle small on those. So now I just created a little different on this last Q. Again, I have an ending Q. This ending Q might be different from all the rest. Just because it says end doesn't mean it matches everybody else. It's just the last Q, and at this point, I'm done with this list. All right. So now that I've done all those, here's where we have multiple ways of running this. So the first way of running this would be running it solely off of Vista. So in this case, I could play with this Q list, play in this Q list, do my stuff here, go in blue. And this can be on any console. This could be on the virtual console. I don't have a console physically connected. So if I had one connected, I'd be pushing the hard buttons on that. So I've played into my final Q there. I'm ready to start. I hit my next one. It's releasing the previous one. And now I can continue to play in, go through my Qs on that one. Oops, I went all the way around, went too far. Okay, so I'll just make it up. I'll go back here. So here's my last Q. I've got nothing else after that. I'll play into my next Q list. It's releasing the previous one, and I'm in there. And I can continue through these Qs. And the reason for these namings on these are to match the ProPresenter slides. So when we go into the next, after I go through this, we'll go into ProPresenter and we'll show how we can automate this from ProPresenter. So there's my end Q on that, and then I'd come into my speaker Q. It did the move in black, and it continued on, and it went right into bringing this speaker lights up. If for some reason I didn't have enough time here, and this had to happen a lot quicker, I could actually put that. Maybe I'd want to copy this Q over into this Q list and just take the intensities down on these lights back here so they'd all come up together. The challenge with that is you'd always have to make sure this song follows this, or this follows this song. If things moved around, then you might have a problem. But if you get into a situation where you have a little bit of, you don't have a lot of time between things, you might have to rejig things a little bit depending on the situation. So again, I'm just going to sit in this speaker Q list for a while, yada, 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 everything's going on, great. And we're coming out of that, and we'll hit the next Q list. It's releasing that, and that's that little thing I don't really like. I don't like the lights fading back up, so I'd probably do something else there. But we are back, we're now in our next song, and we can continue right on. So the benefit of this workflow is adding those commands in there to release the previous Q list. I could do this without adding those commands in there. If I were to do that, I might want to set my fader properties here to be auto play and release. And if something like that, and we will get in this further next week with the Q list properties, but just quickly in the options, we have a fader type, or fader, sorry. Yeah, fader autoplay and release. And that's the one where if I push the fader up, it automatically starts going. And when I bring the fader down, it hits bottom, it automatically releases. So you could do that as well. If I did that, it would be basically playing faders almost like on a sound desk. So I'd push up one, and then I'd push up the next one, bring the other one down. This would work a lot better if you had a console and I could do both these at the same time. But because I don't, this is a little clumsier. So again, it comes down to how you'd like to run your show. So it's just another option. All right, so now that I've done all that, we're going to release everything here. And we're going to go into how do we make this work with ProPresenter. I have to move some windows over on the other side here so I can grab ProPresenter. Actually, before I do that, let's kick over here. Actually, I did most of my stuff in there. It's hard doing this with a single monitor. And actually, this is a good time for me to say this too. I am running ProPresenter and Vista on the same machine. If you were in yesterday's webinar, I do not recommend doing that. Vista requires less resources than ProPresenter, and most likely is going to cause ProPresenter is going to basically bully itself in there and take control and kick everything else out, and you're going to have issues with run Vista. So anyway, what I have here is, again, I have my countdown cue list. Actually, I'm going to have to do it. I'm realizing I'm going to have to do it this way so I can do, man, I need more screen real estate. Okay, we can sort of see things happening there. So if I'm running ProPresenter, I'm going to have my countdown going, and I'm going to manually play this walk-in cue. The benefit to manually playing this type of stuff rather than doing it through ProPresenter is the fact that when I hit the end of this countdown, it's not going to automatically kick right into some of the first songs. That gives us a little extra buffer room in case something's going wrong and we have to hold for a minute. So what I like to do is just kind of sit here and I'll sit in this queue and say, okay, well, we're ready to go. What I've already previously done is in these ProPresenter queues, I've gone in and added, and I'm using ProPresenter 7 because it works nicely on PC. I've added a MIDI note action, which it corresponds to the MIDI note that's assigned to these cue lists. So when I press this slide and hit my background slide, it's going to fire that MIDI note. It's going to fire this cue list, which then has the command to release the previous cue list. So now I'm in here. I hit my next one. My MIDI note is in this one. I have no MIDI note in this slide. I have a MIDI note in this slide. And then on down the line through all these cues. Again, MIDI note, MIDI note. You get the idea here. And finally, I don't have anything at the end here. The idea is that I'm going to sit in the same look, and then as soon as I come in to do the next song, to fire the background of the next song, that's when it's going to send the MIDI note to start this cue list and to release that cue list. Now, what's important to note, again, I mentioned this yesterday, I'm going to say it again. This is a MIDI note. It's the same MIDI note on every one of these slides. And each one of these MIDI notes, all it's doing is it's just saying, push this play button. It doesn't know where Vista is in its queues. So if I were to press this one again and click this slide again, it's going to resend that MIDI note. And actually now it went to the verse lighting cue. So you have to realize that these MIDI notes are not absolute. It's just a relative play to the next one. So if that were to happen and I were to hit now my next slide, I'm going to be ahead of myself on this. So this may or may not be good for your workflow. It kind of depends on how much automation you need and how well your operators can follow along. There are some there's a software available that would let you translate a MIDI note to a MIDI show control message, which would allow me to call up the exact cue. I went through some of that yesterday using a QLab. I'm not going to get into that today though. So if you have any questions on that, you can take a look at the yesterday's. We did a little quick video afterwards explaining some of that. So, all right. So moving on through here. Let's see. So right now I'm out of sync. I got to figure out how I'm going to get back in sync. So the problem here is I can't really hit this cue. I can't hit this slide because it's going to take me further out of sync. So what I could do is I could use some of my modifier keys to go backwards in the cue list if I wanted to. And I have to move this out of my way for a moment. So with doing that is right now I'm set to a play. The red, green, blue modifier keys on a console, or say the shift and command, or shift and control and alt keys, do other things here and change these keys. So what I could do is, in this case, pause. The pause key is also a back key. When nothing's playing, pause will go back. So if I'm holding my shift key right now and hit the pause button, it's going to take me back to the previous cue, which is the verse, which is exactly where I want to be right now because I'm in the verse. It's so laggy when I bring it across. And then when I go in the next one, I'm back in sync with this. And I might have broken something in ProPresenter. Oh, no, maybe not. Okay. Now, what we could do in ProPresenter too is if we really wanted to, we don't necessarily have to put the MIDI note on the actual slide with the content. We could put a blank slide in here that does nothing but fire the MIDI note. So that way you have to physically make sure you hit that. Now, the problem with that is you have to make sure you physically hit that. It's just not going to be an automatic thing. That's going to go to the next cue. And actually, that's exactly what I did here at the end. Because my next thing is going into the presentation, I have an end cue in here, and I don't have a way of transitioning. I don't really want to transition right from here, right in the presentation. I want to go to this end cue first. So I added a blank slide with nothing on it other than the MIDI note. I thought I added the MIDI note to it, but maybe I did not add the MIDI note to it. Or maybe I added the wrong note to it. I could have done all kinds of things. But what would happen is this would fire the end cue here before I go into this one. So we can ignore the fact that I might have screwed up something in ProPresenter because, to be honest, this is the first time I've messed with ProPresenter, at least ProPresenter 7. So that's actually a good point for ProPresenter. It's very intuitive. I made it through there. So anyway, this cue, this slide here has a MIDI note that fired that slide. And then again, I have a MIDI note in here, which would fire into those. Actually, it didn't fire. Maybe I didn't hit that slide. Oh, yes, I didn't hit that slide. So the fact that it does a release all accept allows me to go backwards too. So it didn't matter that I missed that. I could hit that and go back into it. And then if I go to this one, I'm firing that guy and off we go. And now we're back into, our next song. So MIDI notes is a very generic thing. I'm using MIDI notes out of ProPresenter. They don't have to be out of ProPresenter. I could be using MIDI notes out of Ableton. I could use MIDI notes off of basically anything that outputs MIDI notes. I would much rather use MIDI show control if I had the choice. That way I could say I'm firing this cue. However, MIDI show control is also going to require a lot more work on the other program end to make sure that for every cue that I'm making, I have to then make that a specific fire Q1, fire Q2, fire Q3. If I move a cue or change a number, now I have to go back to the other system and rechange that. So a MIDI note is more generic because it's just pushing this play button. So no matter what I change in here, I don't have to change anything on the other system. So any questions on that before I move on to the next point? Everybody with me here still so far?
We have no questions.
All right. So next thing we're going to look at a little bit as this was all doing basically triggering the fire commands or the play commands from somewhere else. On these songs, that was all basically manually run. As long as the operator here is hitting the slides properly, the lighting cues are happening. If we want to automate this more, we could go into timecode, MIDI timecode particularly. Then because MIDI timecode is a digital timecode, it works over network. We don't need any audio hardware to make that happen. MIDI timecode is great for tying two programs together, such as today I have installed Reaper on my machine, and that's massively big. And in Reaper, I have a song loaded up, and I'm not exactly sure if you'd hear any of this because I didn't set up things that way in Zoom. But I have a song, and I have a timecode track here. And I was on a Wedding Singer kick, so I found a fun song. So what's happening here is I have the song playing, and I have a MIDI, or I have a timecode generator track in here. These two are locked together. The song starts 2 seconds after the MIDI timecode starts running. And if I drag this out of the way gently, so I don't break anything else, and go and add a timecode window, throw that up there. So first I'll show you the finished product, then we'll show how we get there. Oh, let me open up one more. All right, so here is a Q list that's time coded, that has time code stamps on it. And what will happen is when I arm this Q list, and if everything still works properly, when I play through this, my time code starts running, and you can see the lighting cues will happen with this as I advance down through there. And that's as far as I programmed. I was trying to keep it simple. So with using MIDI, this gets you this exact timing. It means the operator or whoever's playing back the track only starts playing once, and then every cue comes right in along with it. When I'm doing this, I set my cues to time code for the start action. So if I'm right clicking on these cues, actually if I'm clicking on the headline here of the cues, I can change it to time code and also adjust the time. I've also used learn timing. I'm not going to get into learn timing because there was yesterday's first webinar did a great explanation on learn timing, and it really showed that a lot better. So I'm just showing how we've had this finished cue list that's time coded, and how we're going to get time code from Reaper over into Vista. So because it's MIDI time code, and because I'm on a Mac, I can't just automatically go from from here into Vista. I have to connect the two somehow. So in that case, what I have is I've got the program that I was going through yesterday, Loop MIDI. So what Loop MIDI does on a PC is it lets me create a MIDI port that's local on this PC. And what Reaper will do is Reaper will be patched to that port. Remember where I found all that information. Oh. Preferences. It's on the other screen. So under my MIDI devices in Reaper, I have my ports. So I have a couple different things here. I've got some other things that are attached to my computer, and I've created 2 ports in that Loop MIDI, so that's why I see these 2. And also, this is also the one for the RTP MIDI, which is if I'm sending MIDI over the network, which is probably what you'd end up doing more often than not, especially because Loop MIDI is for keeping MIDI in the same machine, but our recommendation is you don't, so you'd use RTP MIDI to transmit it over the network. So for right now, I have a Loop MIDI port that's enabled as my output from Reaper. And then in Vista, in my user preferences, under MIDI, I have my MIDI port TC, and I have my MIDI notes port, both enabled at the same time. So this is a little different from what I did yesterday, where I did one at a time. Here I have both of these enabled. So actually what's happening is ProPresenter is outputting to the Loop MIDI notes port, and Reaper's outputting to the Loop MIDI timecode port. It's just a way of me keeping them separate. I'm sure you could probably put them together. I'm not a MIDI expert, so you might want to look at research into that, see if there's a reason to keep them separate. But it doesn't change anything on my end. Vista doesn't really care, so I have them both active. And when I have that, I also have to set my timecode settings here. And in my timecode properties, I have this set to timecode sources MIDI. If you're using another program or if you're using an older console and you're bringing Vista or timecode directly into the Vista console, like on an older S3 or S1 console, I'd use LTC. To be honest, I'm finding less and less reasons to use LTC anymore, unless it's old school and I'm coming from a device that only outputs LTC analog down the line. MIDI timecode I'm finding is much more dependable because it is a digital signal, and we don't have to worry about the square wave getting rounded off or anything like that. So again, in my timecode properties, and I'll set 30 frames because that's what I have it set in Reaper. So now the same sort of criteria would apply to this. If I were to have this cue list and it's all time coded, I might have to do a couple little things here. So I might want to actually insert a command before all this stuff. Insert a new cue before, and actually add a couple commands into this. So one command I might want to add is timecode enable. Turn timecode enable on. And I'm going to enable it in that one. I might want to do a release all accept and insert that in there. I might also want to do, what else did I want to do? Oh, MIDI control enable, to make sure that the MIDI is on here so that it's receiving anything over the MIDI port. And now when I look at that, this queue has nothing than just those commands. This way, what would happen is nothing is armed until I hit this queue. So again, doing this in combination with a auto play and release on a fader can be helpful, because I know when my fader is down, the cue list is not active. But when I'm ready to play the song that has the time code, I can throw the fader up without having to hit the play button. It's going to automatically play into that first cue, and which arms everything, and everything's ready to go. So in this case, I'd play that cue. My time code went armed. And if I come over to Reaper, oops, I should probably stop and rewind it before I start that. Let's do this again. We'll play into the first cue. Time code's armed. Everything else is ready to go. Play my song. I've got my 2 seconds of pre-roll first. Now that 2 seconds of pre-roll is handy, because what that does is it lets this time code get locked on before it starts playing. However, that might not always be beneficial. You might need that first cue to start right away, or that 2 seconds might be too long of nothing. So this is where we might be using a combination of a MIDI note and time code, where maybe a MIDI note would fire the first couple cues, or a first cue, and then it would lock in the time code coming from there. So you could get a combination of different things there to make sure that your show plays off the way you want it to. Again, at the end of this cue list too, what I might want to do is add another cue in here, and at the end I would just do nothing but commands. So I might do a time code enable, and I'll turn it off. Or I could do a MIDI control enable. It doesn't matter. In this case, if I just did the time code enable off, that's going to stop the time code. It's going to stop this from listening. Now this can be a halt. This could also be a time code cue. So I could have a time code cue that tells it to stop listening in time code. Or I could make it a follow. So once this cue plays and I get to that one, it's going to turn off this arm here. That way, if the time code jumps around, or if you decide to play another time code track, you don't have anything going on. So again, it comes down to personal preference on how things work for you. I've done this mainly because when I start my tracks, when I start time codes in Vista, I like to start each song on the 10-minute mark, or depending on how many I have, I might just do an hour mark. If I jump back and forth, if I leave this time code enabled the whole time, and I jump to a farther a cue list that's what's the word? An hour later than this, it's actually going to want to play through all these cues. These are going to all play automatically because it's after the time that I'm playing right now. So disabling the time code is helpful for that type of thing. And then also I could do a release on this, and that would make sure that stays off too. So because what that command that I added there was disabling time code on this cue list. So I'm not disabling it on everybody, because this button here would arm everybody. This is just disabling this one from listening to time code. But if I had another one playing, it would continue to work just fine. So, all right. I feel like I just went and spouted a lot of information really quick there. Any questions on that? Did I lose anyone on anything there on programming any of this stuff?
Don't have any questions at the minute.
Okay. All right. So again, even though I'm gonna push more toward the MIDI time code, I'll touch on LTC here briefly. We have a tech note about how to bring LTC into the audio jack of a computer and convert it to MTC. I do have to update that tech note. That requires another program to do that. And I'm going to just do a simple one here and do the LTC reader program. Give me a moment, it's loading up. it is a demo version of the program, so if I leave it running for too long, it will actually go away. So what this LTC reader program does, it does very similar things. I have an input and I have an output, sort of like what I saw on Reaper. My source would be LTC. This would come off of a line in on the computer. An output to MIDI. Again, in the preferences, I'd have to map where that's going. So in this case, my line in would be off of my audio interface, and my output would be the loop MIDI port TC. And then when I had those two going, I'd be able to take timecode from an external source, which I need to hook up because I forgot to hook it back up again. In this case, my timecode off my external source is coming from my phone. There is a little timecode app that will let me do a time of day timecode. If I run this, and there we go. So it's seeing the LTC coming in on the audio line in on this. It's converting it into MTC, and it's sending it through that loop MIDI port over here to my timecode reader in Vista. Again, this is a time of day, so I don't have any control over this right now. If this timecode was being striped from a video, I'd be able to stop and start it and rewind it and do things with that. But it's the same kind of principle as the MTC. So this is just to kind of sum up what we did yesterday too, and reinforce some of that. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that because I don't need that anymore. All right, so the last thing I want to go through has nothing to do with any of this. Has nothing to do with QList and playing through QList. So I do want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with QList and transitioning between QList before I show one other item. I would say I won't come back to any other questions, but I still will if you really have some. All right, so something I'm going to show next is the show merging function. We realized earlier that we haven't really gone into this at all in any of these webinars so far, and this type of operation is actually pretty key to this, because I'm sure you're going to have a lot of places, a lot of you have venues that keep every QList they've ever made, and they have hundreds of QLists, especially in this window. I might have lots and lots, or you might have different pages in here of QLists. The challenge with that is in Vista, whenever you have QList in Vista, Vista has basically calculated in the back end how to go from any queue in any QList to another queue in another QList. So it takes a lot of processing power in the back end that no one ever really realizes. So what we often recommend is in the past, before Vista 3 and show merging, delete old QLists that you don't need and get rid of them. Well, you know, the problem with that is you delete them and then you might want them again. So what I would say is you make a master show file, you keep all your QLists in it, and then you create copies of that show file and delete the ones you need. In Vista 3, we have the merge function. So in the merge show function, when I open up that, I have the option to open up another show. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a new show. Yeah, I'll save this. Okay, my show 2, this is going to be 2 days. Oops. Yeah, whatever. Today's show. Pay no attention, punctuation. All right, so I have an empty blank show. So now I might have a master show somewhere that has my patch data and everything else like that. So in this case, let's see what I got. I got all kinds of shows here. Here, we're going to go with the main demo show file. So this has lots of fun stuff in it. So that makes it, shows me lots of boxes of things to import. So in this case, if I, well, not a whole lot of QLists, but I could import individual QLists. The thing to remember with importing QLists is you also have to import the fixtures that go to those QLists. Because Vista has, when you patch a fixture, it gives it a unique ID number that ties it to the QList. If I import just a QList and don't have the fixtures imported, the QList will end up looking blank. However, the data is still there, it just doesn't apply to any of the fixtures that might have been patched. So that's one of the keys, is when you build a show, that you want to merge between, you really have to build it off of the same patch all the time. That way you're always using these same unique ID numbers on the original fixtures. So in this case, if I just want to import my Viper profiles, I could import everything. I'm not in this case. I'm just going to do that one. I'm going to bring in that Q list. Other things, I could bring in my effects masters. So yeah, let's say we'll bring in those. I'm not going to bother bringing in groups because I'm only bringing one fixture type. Layouts. Again, if I wanted to have a layout, I could bring these all in if I had all these. But again, I only have one fixture type, so I'm going to leave the layouts. Presets, I will bring in presets, and I'll bring in snapshots. At the bottom part of this window are things that are sort of overall settings. So things like the user preferences. Any of the settings I've made in that file user preferences window would be saved in there. Soft key assignments would be where these are all assigned. These defaults, I know some people like to change them a lot, which is fine. And if you have a setting, a default setup that you want to use, you can bring it in. Custom fixture arrangements for some of those fixtures in the background here that were set up around. I don't need them for that. Quick pick of layouts, window layouts. So in this case, I'm not going to really bring in any of this stuff. I'm just going to leave it at just bringing in these Q lists, effects masters, and those fixtures. And when I say OK, it's going to load this up. Now I got to find out where those fixtures were. So they're over here in Universe 2. So it puts them right back where they were originally patched. If for some reason I was merging a fixture from another show into a show that already had fixtures, it would still bring the fixtures in. It wouldn't patch them, though. It would put them down here in the pool because it's going to say, hey, you got something there. I don't know what to do with it, but I don't want to get rid of it. So you'd have to repatch it. And then in here, I have my fixtures. Again, if I brought in my layouts, they'd already be laid out in the way I want them. And it brought in my Q list here. So if I were to put this on a playback, I have some things on there. Oh, well, what it hasn't done is it also, because I've done all this, it also sort of broke my link to WYSIWYG. So that might cause some issues, mainly because it's all the ArtNet. And actually, here we go. This should work if I just assign these, as long as nothing else has gone haywire in ArtNet world. Yeah, it probably, oh no, there it did work. It's actually kind of amazing. Usually when you do something, that type of thing happens, it requires a restart because ArtNet is colliding and it's not happy. So that went actually a lot better than I expected it to. But yeah, so now I have these fixtures in here. So if I were to build a master show file and always build everything off of that master show file, and I can bring in, merge things back and forth from that. So now what would happen is if I went ahead and created a new Q list in this show, because I'm using the same UUIDs that I used, if I created a Q list on these fixtures in this show, I could then merge this Q list back into the original show if I decided to. So this allows you to not have to keep all of your Q lists you've ever made in one show file all the time. You could pull things back and forth between them. So very powerful and can be very handy. All right, so that was a quick, kind of went through merging pretty fast. Is there anybody who has any questions on merging? Have you used merging? Did you know it was even there? Those are some of the questions I have for you guys. And is there anything else you'd like to see that I went through fast that you might want to look at again? Because that, for the most part, sums up everything that I was going for today. I tell you what, I am going to go back and I'm going to open. Yeah, I'll save that. The real question is, where did I save? Ah, there it is. To remember where I saved these show files as I keep changing them and working on them. Yeah, exporting QList. Yeah, this is the way you could do it. So it's actually, I mean, it's technically not exporting; it's importing QList is what it is. But again, you really have to make sure that you're using them on the same base fixtures. There are some other caveats depending on specific situations on how things come across. We have a couple of ideas on stuff that it gets a little more advanced, but yeah, you can easily suck in QList if you've programmed off of this. In fact, if I look at a bunch of these show files that I have in here, pretty much all of these are based off of an original show file that Jack made. So I could probably take any QList that I made in some of these other ones and merge it back into an original show or create a new show and bring things back and forth. So yeah, again, as long as it was all based on that patch. Effects masters just brings in the masters themselves. It just brings in these items, or nope, not those. These items, these effects masters there. The effects themselves, the effects templates themselves are not part of that effects masters. I believe that they're brought in on user preferences. However, I'd have to check on that. Jack, is that something that you remember?
Effects template is in the merge option. I'm pretty sure.
Is it in there?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Ah, yes, effects templates. So I didn't have any that were special in my show file, so it didn't even give me the option. So yeah, so if I bring in effects templates, it'll bring those over, which is different from the effects masters. And actually, you can probably get in the back end and bring over effects templates the long way too. It's possible to do that. I've done that when I've had to. All right. Well, that hour went quite fast. We still have a few more minutes, so if anyone else has anything else that they want to look into. Really, no other questions? No one has any other questions. I thought for sure I'd lose someone in some of the MIDI notes and the time code and all that fun stuff. I guess while I'm sitting here too, I can, let's see, I thought I had RTP MIDI running here. Yeah, just when I was talking about MIDI over network, RTP MIDI is something for PC only. It's basically a clone of what Mac has because it's using Apple Bonjour. If you're going between two Mac machines, you wouldn't need this. It'd automatically do MIDI over network. So in this case, I have to do it. I have to do it on this because I'm on a PC. Things are broken right now because I've made some changes. This originally was from yesterday where I had my QLab machine outputting to here. So now it's all kinds of, it's not very happy with me. But this is what you'd put on, any of the consoles with Vista 3. If it's an L5 that's been converted or an i3 that's been converted, you can add this in there and then bring in, oh, yep, see, there we go. See, it doesn't like it. It would bring in the MIDI over the network. We'll get rid of that. All right. Well, in that case, if there aren't any other questions, we could probably wrap this thing up a little early so everyone can get back on their day and play with things and give things a try if they've learned it. I'll give a little quick plug out to Reaper. I noticed when I went to download it, they're offering a free license that will work for the next month and a half for anyone who's working at home. So I was very pleased to see that. So when I downloaded it and got the license, it automatically installed it for me. So if you've ever wanted to play with a multi-track system, that's pretty cool right there. So, yeah. I have nothing in on it. I'm just saying that because I was pleasantly surprised. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And if you have any other further questions later on down the line, shoot us an email at vistasupport@chroma-q.com, and we'll have our next webinars. Will be the topics of the ones next week will be published tomorrow. Keep an eye on either website or your email, and we'll let you know what we're going to be doing.